the original concept really related to a father and a son and twins. I mean, a son and a daughter. And it was that relationship that was the core of the story. It went through a lot of machinations before I even got to the first draft screenplay. Various characters changed shapes and sizes, it isn't really until it evolved into what is close to what Star Wars now is that then I began to go back and deal with the stories that evolved to get us to that point, and that, it's hard to say really where how it evolves into a piece, because you evolve it with various scenes and various moments, and when you're creating something like that, the story itself takes over and the characters take over, and they begin to tell the story apart from what you're doing, and you kind of go with it, and you have to go with it, and it sends you down some very funny paths. Then you have to figure out how to break that apart and put the puzzle back together so it makes sense and is cohesive. But that's the adventure of writing, is the fact that you're not sure where it's going to go. And I think it took a while. I mean, I worked on Star Wars for a couple of years before it evolved into what it is. When I first did Star Wars, I did it as a big piece. It was like a big script. It was way too big to make into a movie. So I took the first third of it, which was basically the first act, and I turned that into what was the original Star Wars. In the process of rewriting that script and thinking of it as only a movie and not the whole trilogy, I decided that Ben Kenobi really didn't serve any useful function after the point he fights with Darth Vader. Although in that draft, he continued on through the air battle at the end, and then he continued on through the whole script, the other two stories. But when I took one and I looked at it, I said, he just stands around for the last 25% of the film, watching this air battle go on. And he really has no real function, and it would probably be much more satisfying, powerful, and interesting if Darth Vader were to kill him, or he were to go into a different form. I made that decision based on just working on Star Wars. After Star Wars was successful, and I said, well, gee, I could finish this entire script, and I could do the other two parts. I came to certain realizations about things that were in the script that were more difficult to now translate. Another one was the Wookiee. In the end of the film, it takes place on a Wookiee planet, and there's a big battle with the Empire and the Wookiees and that sort of thing. Since I couldn't do that, I took one of the Wookiees and made him a co-pilot with Harrison. But in the original concept, the Wookiees were a primitive tribe, and that was sort of key to what was going on at the end of the film. And then when I put Chewbacca in as a co-pilot, I've kind of established them as a fairly sophisticated race. And so then, when I went back, I couldn't use the Wookiees, so I turned them into Ewoks. So in the case of Ben Kenobi, I had Luke being trained by Ben, only I had killed Ben off. So now I had to come up with another Jedi who was older and wiser and shorter than Ben to train Luke. And that's how, that was the beginning premise of Yoda. I was looking for a princess who was young. Ideally, I wanted somebody about 16 years old, 17 years old. Both Luke and Leia were supposed to be around the same age, and I wanted somebody, teenager-like. So it was finding somebody who could hold her own against strong actors, and still be the princess that she needed to be, and be the authority figure that she needed to be, and make it believable. And she was able to do that. And again, with these actors, all of them, I'd seen thousands of people, tested, 20 or 30 people, and then gone down to on tape, and then gone down to a very finite group of, maybe 7 or 8 actors for each role on film. and then studied it, and then we did that process again. So it was a very complicated procedure that took like 9 months to go through. So it wasn't just a that's the one kind of thing. It was a very arduous, thoughtful process. He started out in American Graffiti, and then I used him as a foil to do tests in Star Wars. I didn't actually interview him for Star Wars. He was brought in to do, play against the other actors. I had all these Lukes coming in, and so he would play against them, and I shot the screen test. And, when you watch the screen tests of him playing the role and the other actors who were up for the role playing the role, there was just no question about who was the best. And, so I hired him for Star Wars. I wanted a sort of a slick used car dealer voice, and tried everything I could to get another actor to come up to the performances that Tony had, and I just couldn't find anybody to do it. And that was one of the reasons why I ended up with James Earl Jones as Darth Vader, because it really takes the top-class actor to pull off that kind of an idea, to really be able to get into a part where you're just putting your voice over an animated character, or in this case, it's not even an animated character, because it's a character that's already been shot. So it's the reverse of what you get to do in animation. In animation, you get to sort of act it and create it. In this one, you're sort of working within the confines of what somebody else has already created. The movement and the timing and all that sort of thing has been determined for you. And to be able to come up with a really excellent performance, given that, if you're not the one that's actually doing it, it's extremely difficult. Fairly early on that the idea of a space dogfight came into play. Wouldn't it be interesting to take that kind of visual excitement and put it into outer space? So it was written, I think, very early on. It's in almost all the drafts of the screenplay. And in order to, I had no idea at that point how I was going to accomplish it. So it really wasn't until I sat down to figure it out and got together with some of the people who I brought in to start ILM that we began to focus on the fact that we would have to create a different technology in order to accomplish that. The approach that I had, which is to do it editorially rather than pictorially, I think I had from the very beginning, because it seemed inconceivable that I could actually do what Kubrick had done in 2001, and have it be done for any kind of amount of money that I would have access to. So I figured I would do it by sleight of hand, using a lot of editorial techniques. And so I had to create something that was in motion. And we did some what we call videomatics, which we'd take little models and move them around on video and transfer that. And we did do some little animated pieces with very crude animation. And then I took footage from actual dogfights that we got out of gun cameras in World War I and World War II, and various documentaries and that sort of thing. And out of that created a sequence that is more visual in motion.